Welcome to another CEO Wisdom podcast. We have Mihir Pershad with us today. He's CEO and founder at Umami Bioworks. We're going to talk about his startup, which is very interesting to say the least. He's a serial entrepreneur. And yeah, Umami is pioneering not caught seafood. So interesting and very relevant topic as our oceans are depleted nowadays. And it's quite important to take care of one of the Earth's biggest lungs, apart from the forests. This one is live, so thanks me here for accepting to do that live one. This podcast is brought to you by podpire.com. If you want to start and monetize your podcast, go to podpire.com. Mihir, welcome to the pod, the live one. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and Umami?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So my background is born and raised in the United States and studied in biochemistry, and so come from traditional, I guess, biotech R&D background, and then ended up spending about 4.5 years building startups at a venture studio back in before those I think had become really established, and built several companies that were biotech in the seafood space, and that took me out to Asia quite a bit. It's where most of the seafood business is. And I got to see a whole new side of the food production, system that I hadn't seen sitting in the office here in the U.S. And what I saw sort of worried me because we were working on disease management, and I realized that there are a lot of these not so stable forces in the system, things like high density culture of animals, which lends itself to disease outbreaks, as we've all experienced now, among with other issues of just stable production season over season. And I felt like that was something that was not being given enough attention. That was a big problem that needed more radical solutions than just trying to solve disease every season, the same way. So I decided to start Umami in 2019 at the end of the year, and moved out to Singapore actually to start the company because, as I mentioned, almost 70% of the world's seafood business is based in Asia. And so I felt to really embed myself in the business, I needed to be in that part of the world. So I moved to Singapore, and that's where Umami is headquartered. And Umami is developing basically the Amazon Web Services for biomanufacturing, starting with this endangered species of seafood that are hard to farm. So the idea is we prove the first application of biomanufacturing as a future sustainable production solution with something that has a near-term impact in making our food system more sustainable. And then we start to help other companies do the same and take that same principle and apply it to coffee and chocolate and the many other things that might be at risk from climate change and from degrading ecosystems.
So is it mostly a software company, or are you actually producing an end product? Like, tell us specifically like who you work with, and if Umami is more of a software stack, or if you actually produce these seafoods.
Yeah, and I forget who said it, but I would put us in the category of like a full stack deep tech company. So we basically do biology plus hardware plus software as a product. So the biology is the cell from the fish and how to grow it, what to feed it. The hardware is what system actually is used for the manufacturing, so the bioreactors and the whole actual factory line. And then the software is automating it so that traditional food companies can adopt it. And so that's really the whole stack. Our customers are basically the incumbents. So we want to transform production. So where a normal fishing company might have used to run fishing boats, now has some farms plus some boats. We want to give them a third option, which is basically an onshore factory to produce. And so we're working with some of the biggest names in the business. Our first large partner is Maruha Nichido, which is the biggest seafood company worldwide, based out of Japan. And we've got a few more in the packaged food, branded food business that are not public yet, but very much not looking to replace with our own product, looking to help transform the actual production, but have trusted brands bring this to consumers, because we think that'll be one of the big barriers.
And why decide to go full stack slash vertically integrated rather than just like going at one stage cracking that problem and like seed, for example, and then at Series A cracking another and so forth.
Yeah, I think the core insight here is that when you're trying to change a system where your customers are all enterprise level, uh, it's very difficult to transform the system with piecemeal solutions because they have a huge adoption barrier in that big enterprises at any sort, but especially in food, they want the system to sort of work, right? They want to plug it in and be able to just use it. And if we try to break down a minimum subset that isn't the full stack, you can't actually deliver that. If I could deliver a cell line, the food company doesn't know what to do with the cell line. So then the reality was we sort of took this Rippling-esque approach of saying if we can build some core know-how, what levels of I guess product aspects are needed to stack to make that really minimally viable for the customer. And it turns out
Right.
that's actually a pretty thick stack that's needed.
Yeah, and I guess the cost is also a very important factor. Do you feel that you've got it to a very reasonable cost that is competing with their currently existing archaic solutions?
Yeah, so I'll be a little bit contrarian here and say that I think people over-index on cost because they're talking about commodities, but we're not at the point where we're a mass market commodity replacer. We're definitely still in that premium Tesla Roadster part of the market where you have to be in. You can't be a $300,000 sports car, right? But nobody would argue the Tesla Roadster was an everyday car for most people. But in that segment, it had one or two things that gave it the right to win some customers. And I think that's where we are now. So we look at in these premium endangered species, things like eel, which sell wholesale for $80+ a kilogram. We can be at parity there, and we can offer a similar experience at those high end, but we're not replacing salmon at what you're normally buying at the grocery store yet. So yeah, I mean parity within the segment, but not mass market.
So are you saying that you're selling a premium? Well, I mean, you would be selling them a premium product that they would sell premium to because it's been lab grown. Is like that an actual interest of the end customer? Or?
It's not sort of premium because it's lab grown. It's a premium segment that we're targeting with product. So it would be at parity within the segment. But just as an example, that's maybe more common. If you think about like caviar, caviar lives in a very certain part of a market, right? There's caviar in champagne bars, and it's in these very high end restaurants. So when you put yourself into that category to start, price tends not to be the biggest driver of that consumer segment's behavior. They're looking for other things. So our point of view is if we start in these higher segments with endangered species that are naturally pretty expensive, then we need to find one or two attributes that resonate with that consumer. And in some cases, it might be health, it might be nutritional value, um, could be sustainability, although that hasn't seemed to really be a driving point for most consumers. But it won't be price first. Whereas if you're in a mass market segment in food, it will be price first.
Right. So I don't know, take a two-star Michelin restaurant sushi that would have want an extremely high quality of something, or I don't know, a fish with more omegas if you can prove it in a lab or something. And then what would be your strategy to go mass production and mass market? Like get enough money for that, get enough proven concepts so that you can accumulate more investors and go after, I don't know, the 50 million funding round?
A little bit, but our actually big lever is we want to prove this approach and then basically become a licensing and supply business. So by partnering with the traditional incumbents, we can bring traditional industry capital to the factory so that we don't have to raise $1 billion to build factories. We can basically raise to develop new products to expand our capability, but the large capex and distribution spend actually comes from our partners and our customers. Uh, but yet the model is actually, I'd say, very similar, right? You start in this low volume, high price category segment, then sort of just take stepping stones and work down price and up in category volume step by step.
And maybe get acquired by one of these big companies. And how did you get in touch with like the biggest and the baddest from the get-go. How did that happen? Was it social proof from the capital you've raised and prototypes that you've had going on? That seems to be pretty impressive that you had that from the get-go. And what was the strategy behind it as well?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we didn't necessarily have certainly the most capital raised. We have many uh, others in our space who've raised 50 or 100 times more than we have. But what we did have, I think, was a B2B first mindset. We knew from the get-go that we didn't want to make our own brand, and that our sort of lifeline to prove the business existed was to get a strategic that believed what we believed. And so we spent quite a bit of time early on listening to customer pain, trying to understand how to position, and where a lot of alternative protein companies, the Beyond and the Impossibles, have sometimes positioned taking a stance directly against traditional animal agriculture, we felt like that was not going to be conducive to our model. And so we came in very clearly saying we are making complementary approaches. We do think things need to change. We do think there are sustainability issues, but we're not going to revolutionize everything overnight. We have places where we can win, and that's a win for our customer and for the consumer. And that level of like multiple layers of messaging, I think helped to build trust that we actually knew what it would take. You know, sometimes it's easy as a startup to get caught up in your own story, and then you start saying, we're going to transform the industry, and you're selling a 1-ton factory in a 100 million ton business, saying we're going to revolutionize the world. And that comes off as very naive to people who work in the business. And I think we tried to be smart about knowing where we could win and where it was too early for us to make a case, and try to build the relationships and the trust with our customers now.
And it seems that problem, the ocean's health has always been like on top of your radar. Can you tell us why the ocean's health is so important, and also the state of things compared to other challenges like deforestation that have been contributing to climate change?
Yeah, I would say, you know, one of the big challenges is our oceans are much less well studied than most other ecosystems on Earth. So we're often guessing where we'd like to actually have firm data. But I think it's pretty clear from the data that we do have that wild fish populations have been in significant decline over the last few centuries due to intensification and commercialization of fishing at a massive scale. Um, and that comes with multiple knock-on effects, but I think we're already starting to see some worrying trends in reduction in algae in the oceans, which are, I think, as you said to start off the podcast, very critical lungs for the planet, and they produce about half the oxygen that we breathe. But more than that, there's actually a pretty significant carbon pump in the oceans, where a lot of these big marine mammals and fish, when they die, they settle to the bottom. They feed this whole ecosystem that never basically gets any sunlight. But that carbon also eventually gets sequestered in the seafloor. Um, and now through very large scale bottom trawling, we're actually seeing that we're actually turning some of that carbon back into the atmosphere. And it's on the order of about 50% of what aviation's producing per year, just from the trawling itself. And when we add that into the fact that oceans have been massively absorbing carbon that we've overproduced via industrialization, I think we're entering a really worrying scenario in which the oceans are too acidic to support many types of life. And we hit the point where they become pretty saturated with CO2, and we start seeing much more rapid CO2 accumulation in the atmosphere because the oceans are no longer able to sink as much of it.
And are you tracking your impact and Umami's impact on the ocean? And is that like a KPI, a metric that drives you as a CEO?
It definitely is. I think for a lot of reasons. One, I mean, as a mission of our company, we want to measure, are we actually making a positive impact on the system, as opposed to just making money doing the same thing differently. But especially for our customers, being able to actually make the case that this is a more sustainable path forward. Many of them, I think, want to make a sustainable bet, but it has to actually be economically rational. And so we're trying to basically be able to make that compound case that this is a good financial choice, and it can also be a more sustainable output. And so we align with a few different frameworks. We're measuring against the 9 planetary boundaries framework, as well as one that was put out that's called the Ocean Impact Navigator, that is sort of more ocean focused, but broadly takes from many different frameworks that are out there. But as an example, we certainly look at greenhouse emissions for our processes end to end compared to traditional, but then especially things like biodiversity and endangered species preservation in the oceans, and some of these communities that have been dependent on the ocean for centuries as smallholders, and how we can help to maintain good quality of life for those communities as well. Some of these are quite abstract and hard to directly measure, but if we never measure, we'll never know. So we try to at least be pretty deliberate about that.
So, as a social startup founder, what's the right equilibrium between wanting to save the planet Earth and capitalism to fuel these action of yours and reach these hard goals?
Yeah, it's always an interesting question, right? I think the way we think about it is if we don't ensure that our own solution is actually better, then we're lying to ourselves and to everyone around us when we talk about making a better system. So step one is make sure we're actually better than what we're trying to replace on a couple of key metrics. And so that starts by doing life cycle assessments, but also just understanding the key levers where the problems are in sustainability in the traditional system. But to do anything at scale where you actually have an impact that you can talk about, you have to build a business that survives in a capitalist economy, right? So you have to build a business that makes money and grows. And I don't think those things are incompatible as long as your core business proposition is also impact driven. If impact is a separate metric to a financial metric, you're going to have places where there's conflicts and you have to choose one or the other. If growing your business inherently improves sustainability metrics compared to the baseline that you're benchmarking, then those things are in harmony in the majority of cases. So we try to basically say that the companies are sort of naturally impact led because the business model and the proposition itself is aligned with the impact, as opposed to saying, we're building a financial business that can also be sustainable in the right circumstances.
You're in a difficult niche. One of your saying is per aspera ad astra. Tell us the meaning of that, and yeah, how's your mindset when you actually get through dry periods or hard difficulties in your niche?
Yeah, so per aspera ad astra, or the inverse ad astra per aspera, is sort of a through hardship to the stars, which just resonates with me. I've always been a fan of science fiction growing up, and I think many people working in these frontier industries have some grounding in fantasy or science fiction, thinking about what a positive future actually could look like, right, for humanity. And I think the reality is anything worth doing is hard, and if it weren't, it's probably the easy things are rarely high impact things, because if they were, they'd be done already. So for me, it's always been something that I've wanted to do with my career and with my life, and I think it's become more apparent working on really hard problems is how we make progress for current humanity, for civilization. And I think my point of view is coming maybe a little bit from fantasy literature. Is the most advanced civilizations, often elves or other similar things, are sort of highly technologically advanced, but also living in tremendous harmony with nature. And I think that's something we should aspire to. So I would say it's a sort of a techno-naturalist type of view, that there are ways for us to build a better future for ourselves that aren't technology only, but it's technology recognizing we're still biological organisms that evolved on this planet, evolved to live in harmony with nature, and running from that tends to leave us in trouble. So I think there's some ways for us to think about which problems to solve without getting a little bit too caught up in our own, we are the gods of our world, and we can do whatever we want without consequence, because that's turned out to not really be true. So
There you go. You have this book, Cultivated Abundance. You're a member of the World Economic Forum, or at least on their website. What's your PR strategy to spread the word, and make sure that the cause gets some much needed attention?
Yeah, I think, we try to let our work speak for itself, and then when opportunities present themselves, talk about the fact that things aren't necessarily all doom and gloom, but that the solutions aren't going to present themselves, right? So I think I'm always cautious because I think the history of startups has many, many companies that promise the world and deliver a very small fraction of that. And it sometimes disillusions the broader population and those in government from trusting what startups say about what the world can be. And so, we think telling people that the problems we all understand are solvable, but that we have to make a cognizant choice to actually make the changes that we know are necessary and not shy away from difficult choices because they'll only get more difficult, the less time we have to actually make the change. And actually, my whole purpose in writing Cultivated Abundance to begin with was to convince myself that this was a journey worth going on. I was working at the studio and trying to think, how crazy is it to say we're going to potentially revolutionize production of food by growing cells instead of animals? Is that even a rational way to solve a problem? The problem is obvious. Is the solution rational? And so I tried to lay out my own thinking around patterns of success in these kind of deep tech transformative businesses, and very much still guides the way that we run Umami today, that level of thinking, identifying the right kind of problems, making sure solutions are actually a big enough lever. Because if you make incremental change, the work is just as hard, but it's much harder to inspire people to come join you along the way. I think if the work is hard, the mission's ambitious enough, and the approach is revolutionary enough, you get super smart people who really want to do something impactful with their life, willing to not get paid what they could get paid at some big company to come and work at a startup. And I think that level of grassroots evangelism is something that we really believe in.
Yeah, I think more and more people are conscious about their career choice and want to choose a moonshot that's intellectually stimulating. Obviously, it's harder to work in those careers, but a sense of purpose and of meaningfulness is quite important as well in your overall happiness in life and the potential impact that you'd be making. I feel also in clean tech, tables have shifted in the last 1 or 2 years. I think we have like big momentum. So makes me very hopeful to see folks like you that are working on cracking these very hard problems. So thanks for what you're doing here. Where can people find out more about you?
Sure. So the company website is umamibioworks.com, and you can read more about what we're doing there. People can reach me on LinkedIn, just Mihir Pershad, and yeah, very happy to chat with anybody who's interested in working with us or embarking on their own journey and wants to just talk more.